Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Just want to let everyone know that our program is going to begin promptly in a few minutes. So we are ushering people to their seats, if you would, and you have minutes to peruse your program. And we're very excited and grateful that you're here. Good evening. Please join me in welcoming Charlotte Couture. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Charlotte Couture, and I'm in 8th grade at Smith Middle School, and I'm 14 years old. Tonight, my voice speaks for the children's voices we cannot hear, the voices of the 1.5 million children that perished in the Holocaust. These children cannot tell their stories, so we are doing that for them. Some of their artwork is on display, and we'll be reading some of their poetry. This poem, entitled Waiting was written by 12-year-old Anna Klasnerova while she was being held at Terezin concentration camp near Prague. Waiting. The wind is singing in the crowns of the trees, a sad song of eternal longing. We want to go home, just home. But this time is so long. When we wait for our ardent wishes to come true, or perhaps we'll be waiting until we die. When this life full of suffering and sorrow ends, will we still experience a few happy years? No answer anywhere. Waiting again without end. Perhaps in a year, a month, perhaps tomorrow. It has to be one day. It will be one beautiful morning, and then we will start to live again.
Rabbi Dr. Carrie Tooling is the spiritual leader at Congregation Kol Haverim. She was ordained in 2004 and received her PhD in 2013. She also published the book, Thinking About God, Jewish Views in 2020. Please welcome Rabbi Tooling.
Thank you. When I was an undergraduate, I spent a semester abroad in Germany, and I was there, of course, to learn German. That was the express purpose of the trip. But I'd also felt a need to go there and find out whether Germans were a different kind of people. I wanted to see if there was some obvious reason for the Holocaust. And what I found was that Germans are not particularly different in the ways that really matter. They were thoroughly normal. You might even say depressingly so. While I was living there, I hung out with a group of students from a diverse list of nations, and one night we had dinner together, and we were hanging out in the dorm kitchen, telling jokes in English. And one of the students made a tasteless ethnic joke, the sort that goes a Jew, a Frenchman, and an Arab. And so he told the joke, and almost everyone laughed, or at least groaned, except for Bernd. He was the German man in our group, and he was very quiet and very still. And thinking that Bernd perhaps did not understand the joke, for humor is indeed difficult to translate, the joke teller proceeded to tell the joke again. So see, there was this Jew and Frenchman and Arab, and this time Bernd slammed his fist on the table, and he said, "I understood it the first time." And we were stunned. Where's this anger coming from? And he calmed himself, and it took a minute, and he said, "In Germany we have a saying. Asylanten, as you know, are asylum seekers, refugees, immigrants. Ausländer are foreigners. And Witz is a joke. So this is the saying. Asylantenwitz, foreigner joke, or immigrant joke. Ausländerwitz, foreigner joke. Auschwitz. Words matter. The names we use when we talk about each other matter. Our jokes matter. We should be careful not to hurt another. We should be careful to avoid marginalizing others. Atrocities happen in places where it is acceptable to marginalize the other. Even a nation as cultured as Germany can descend into brutality, and even a people as acculturated as the German Jews can be targeted for genocide. The veneer of civilization does not change that basic fact. In confronting the Holocaust, we find that we have to let go of the sense that culture will serve as a brake for the worst in human nature. We now live with the awareness that our narrow range of experiences does not predict the full range of what is actually possible, and humans are infinitely clever in the worst possible way. In the negative sense, that awareness means that we must acknowledge that the world can slip into an unimaginable brutality in a generation, or less. In the positive sense, the reverse is also true. What is needed, therefore, is a cautious but tenacious idealism. We should not let what is in the world eclipse what ought to be. We can be better than this. Blessed is Adonai, our God, who gives us the power to transcend ourselves. May God teach us how to be tolerant, how to be open, and how to say something when it really matters. Amen.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Carol Fishman, and I am the chairperson of the second annual Glastonbury Holocaust Remembrance Evening, along with Elizabeth Berman and Deborah Glass. We are thrilled to once again work with First Church and Reverend Kate to bring you this meaningful event, and are eternally grateful for their time, their partnership, and their commitment to educate the community about the Holocaust. In addition, none of this would have been possible without the generosity of our sponsors. I am honored to welcome you tonight. The theme of this evening is the children of the Holocaust, those who perished and those who survived. 1.5 million innocent children were senselessly murdered during the Holocaust. Many were sweet babies and toddlers whose only crime was being Jewish. To put it in perspective, 1.5 million people is more than the entire population of Rhode Island. As you walked in, you received an ID card in your program. On that card is the photo and story of a child from the Holocaust. Please look at the photo now and think about your son, your daughter, your friend, or your grandchild. Each and every one deserves to be remembered. Let us all take a moment of silence in their memory and in memory of all who perished in the Holocaust. You may also have noticed the Daffodil Project mentioned in your program. The Daffodil Project is a nonprofit organization dedicated to planting 1.5 million daffodils around the world in memory of the children who were murdered in the Holocaust. I am so proud that GHRP will be planting a memorial garden of 250 daffodils at the Riverfront Community Center in the fall. There will now be a living tribute to the children of the Holocaust right here in Glastonbury. There is also artwork displayed in the front of the meeting house. This artwork was drawn by first and second graders from a Jewish day school in Vienna before these young students were deported to the gas chambers at Auschwitz. Only 3 students from these 2 grades survived, and one of them lives in West Hartford. Since our event last year, we have witnessed continuing Jew hatred, and we are more convinced than ever that more education is necessary for everybody, the young, the old, and everyone in between. In 2024, the Anti-Defamation League, also known as the ADL, reported 9,354 anti-Semitic attacks last year. They have been tracking this information for 45 years, and it is the largest number of anti-Semitic attacks ever reported. It equates to an 893% increase in Jew hatred attacks over the last decade. In 2024, there were more than 25 anti-Jewish incidents in the United States on average per day. That is more than 1 per hour. There has also been an alarming increase in anti-Semitism on college campuses in 2024. Per the ADL, 83% of college students have experienced or witnessed anti-Semitism on campus. We don't have to look far to see this trend. Just look at what's been happening at Yale, at Harvard, at Columbia, just to name a few. According to a Hillel study, 63% of Jewish students do not feel safe on campus. And per the ADL, 20% of millennials have never heard about the Holocaust. How can that be? If these statistics remind you of what happened in Nazi Germany, you're right. As a Jew, I worry every single day about what will happen to me, to my children, to my grandchildren, to my extended family and friends. We must all learn from history so we don't make the same mistakes again. When I say never again, I mean never again. We cannot be silent. Silence is complicity. The Holocaust did not happen in a vacuum. Hitler did not wake up one day and decide to exterminate the Jews and everyone else who did not fit his criteria of a perfect Aryan. It started with words and was a calculated plan that was put in place and followed over many, many years. This plan was fueled with endless lies, hate, and propaganda. Hitler had a well-thought-out plan and perfectly executed campaign to convince people to hate the Jews. Jews were the scapegoat for all the problems in Germany and the world. These lies and propaganda spread back then without social media. So we all know with social media how quickly propaganda spreads in today's world. Hitler's plan resulted in the horrific murder of 6 million innocent Jews and 5 million others who did not meet Hitler's criteria: the gay community, the Roma, the disabled, and many others. It doesn't seem possible that hate could lead to such unspeakable violence, but it did. And I fear it could happen again. It has only been 80 years since the Holocaust, and as a Jew, it is terrifying to witness this growing hatred. We say never again and never forget, but people are forgetting. And the hatred is visible and growing daily. A recent horrific example is the massive fire during the holiday of Passover at Governor Shapiro's house in Pennsylvania. Each one of us has a responsibility to speak up against hatred toward Jews and against hatred of any kind. Our goal is to educate people, one person at a time, so a Holocaust can never happen again toward any marginalized group of people. In conclusion, I would like to share a photo with you. This is a photo of the Sagalis family from Biržai, Lithuania. The mother, Basha, the father, Munka, and their 7 adoring children. Heschel, David, Frumka, Birka, Tefka, Risala, and Shalom. Heschel, or Harry, the oldest son, immigrated to the United States alone in 1939 at 18 years old and lived with his aunt, uncle, and cousin. A mere 2 years later, on August 8th, 1941, the remainder of his family, along with the 2,400 other Jewish residents of Biržai, were forced by the Gestapo and Lithuanian collaborators to dig mass graves in the forest outside of town. And they were all shot to death in cold blood, just because they were Jewish. Half of the town's population was brutally murdered in one day. This is not just any story. This is my story. Basha and Munka were my great aunt and uncle. And those children, they were all my cousins. And they were all murdered just because they were Jewish. They are my family, they are my legacy, and they are my inspiration. It is in their memory that I stand here tonight before all of you. I will never forget. I thank every one of you for being here, for bearing witness, and for confronting hatred across all communities. I hope you all leave here tonight with a little more knowledge, empathy, and understanding. Never again is right now. Thank you all.
Good evening. As Carol mentioned, tonight's theme is children of the Holocaust. Children were certainly the most vulnerable victims of Nazi persecution. Of the 1.5 million children who perished, most were deported to death camps like Auschwitz in Poland, where they died in gas chambers. Others perished from starvation, disease, and freezing temperatures. The systematic murdering at mass graves of Jewish men, women, and children, known as Holocaust by bullets, also took place throughout Europe during World War II. The most well-known massacre took place in Babi Yar, near Kyiv. Tens of thousands of non-Jewish, Polish and Romani or Gypsy children, and over 5,000 German children with physical and mental disabilities living in institutions were also killed by the Nazis. There were many heroic efforts by non-Jewish Jews and friends and neighbors to save Jewish children. Some were secretly hidden together with their families, as was the case with Anne Frank. Jews were hidden in attics, convents, and in the forests. Hiding Jews from the Nazis were acts of courage taken at great risk. When this deception was discovered by the Nazis, the penalty was death. An organized effort by the British government, called the Kindertransport,
saved over 10,000 Jewish children living in Nazi-controlled lands by bringing them to England. Imagine the anguish of a parent desperate to save their child's life, giving a child to strangers, unsure whether they would ever see them again. Often these children were the only members of their families that survived the Holocaust. Known as the righteous among the nations, Israel honors these over 28,000 non-Jewish men and women who risked everything in acts of kindness to save innocent lives from Nazi persecution. Sadly, we learned this afternoon of the passing of Robert Lesser, a Holocaust survivor and beloved brother of Rabbi Lazowski, who was our keynote speaker last year. Many of you probably heard him speak. We would like to dedicate tonight's program to his memory, and as we say in the Jewish tradition, may his memory be for a blessing. I would now like to ask Nina Jacobs and Rachel Donnell, our speakers for tonight, to come light 6 memorial candles honoring all who died in the Holocaust.
Hello. I'm gonna introduce you, Nina.
Oh, okay. In a rush.
It is my privilege and honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Nina Jacobs. You will learn her fascinating story of survival and resilience this evening. As Elie Wiesel said, once you hear a witness, you become a witness. We are so grateful to have her with us this evening. Please join me in welcoming Nina.
Thank you one and all for coming. There's been a lot of reference made this evening to the 1.9 million Jewish children. They were all under the age of 15. I wanted to emphasize that because if you were 15 or older, you could do hard labor. Under 15, you didn't deserve to live. I'm one of the lucky ones. When Hitler's army marched into Poland in 1939, September of 1939, the population of Poland was 3.3 million Jewish families. the population that was murdered was 6 million, in other words, double the state of Connecticut's population. As soon as the Nazis came into Poland, they started to institute laws against the Jewish people. So I'm sure you're familiar with the Jewish star that everybody had to wear, and what was the purpose of that? But to signal them out so they would be obvious wherever they went. Curfews were established for the same reason, that being by Jews having to be in their homes at a certain hour of the evening, it meant they were easy to be found. Jewish men were picked up off the streets, never to be seen again. They were sent to labor camps or to their death. In essence, Jewish life, as the Jewish people knew in Poland, was completely turned upside down. At the same time that this was happening, ghettos were being established. There was a small existing ghetto in Vilna, which is the city that I come from, but they established another 2 ghettos, and they divided the 2 ghettos in half. One of the ghettos was for the workers, the other ghettos were for the orphan children and the elderly. As soon as the Jews entered the ghetto, they realized what their fate was probably going to be. When you take a ghetto that consists of maybe 500, 1,000 people, and you squeeze an additional 3,000 into it, you can imagine the conditions that existed. It was appalling. Families had a minute space in which to exist. Sometimes families just hung up a sheet to divide them from some other family so there would be some privacy for them. Diseases were running rampant because the sanitation was not good and because the Nazis controlled every bit of food or whatever came into the ghetto, and there wasn't very much of it. Rumors were also running rampant around the ghetto all day, every day. People were always kept off balance from one moment to another. You didn't know if you were going to live, if you didn't know if you were going to have enough food for yourself, for your children. Life was just absolutely horrific and fearful every single day of living in the ghetto. And every morning, the dead were placed out on the street, and these enormous, what looked like wheelbarrows came into the ghetto, and the bodies were just tossed on top of on the wheelbarrows, and they were taken to an empty pit, and they were thrown there. Imagine that happening to anybody, or even to an animal, would be treated with more dignity. Before entering the ghetto, my uncle had prearranged with 3 separate families. In the event that I need your help, will you be there to help me? These Polish families had no idea what help would be required, nor did my uncle have any idea as to what he would ask of them. But these were people that had worked for him, and he knew them for many years, and he trusted them. So, entered into the ghetto was my uncle, my mother's brother, his wife, my grandmother, and my parents who were newlywed, and my uncle's daughter, my cousin. My uncle was a leather tanner, so he was deemed very valuable to the Germans. Why? What did they wear from head to toe? Leather. So he was valued, and as a result of being valued, he was given a pass called a shina. If you saw Steven Spielberg's movie, Ben Kingsley had one of those passes, and it was called China because it was yellow and shone. So that pass meant life or death for our family, because my uncle would go to the gate, show the pass to the Nazis. They would allow him to leave the ghetto. And in doing so, he would go to the various farms around, and he would barter to get food to bring in to us. As I said, my parents were newlyweds in the ghetto. It was a very hot night in September, and in these close quarters, they decided to step outside and get a breath of air. And as the Nazis generally did, they stormed the ghetto, and they arrested both of them. The women went to one prison, the men went to another prison. The following morning, the women were released, and they took 5,000 men and boys to an empty pit. And from morning till night, till they couldn't see anymore, they were murdering them, they were shooting them. You could hear the screams of the men, you could hear the pleading, you could hear the cries, and you could hear the prayers. And they were all killed. So to give you an idea of what that number represents, if you ever went to see the Yard Goats play, in their stadium there are 6,000 seats. Picture an empty stadium, that's what they murdered. That night, when my father didn't return to my mother, she knew that he had been killed. And needless to say, devastation set in. Here he was, a healthy 26-year-old, and his life was snuffed out. About a month or so later, my mother realized that she was having a child. Well, the Nazis had decreed that if a Jewish woman is found to be pregnant in the ghetto, she would be murdered. So my mother said to her mother, I need to have an abortion. If they find me, they will kill me. My grandmother said, no. What do you mean, no? My life is at stake. How could it be no? My grandmother said, whatever will happen to us will happen to the child. But in the event, just maybe in the event, that child would survive, there would be an indication in the world that once upon a time, that child had a father. Sorry, it doesn't matter how many times I do it, it doesn't get easier. So 7.5 months later, I was born, and my uncle found a tiny little attic space for my mother and myself. And that's how we stayed for those 17 months, never went outside. There was a little window so we could see that it was night or day or raining or what have you. But as I said previously, there were rumors that were constantly floating around the ghetto, but my uncle heard a rumor that he took extremely seriously. And the rumor was that they were coming to take the last remaining children out of the ghetto. So my uncle left the ghetto and he made contact with one of the Polish farmers and said, I have a child. Will you take that child? And the woman said that she did. He came back to the ghetto, gave his daughter some wine to drink. She fell asleep, put her under his armpit, put on a big overcoat, oversized overcoat, walked out of the ghetto into the forest and passed off a sleeping child to a peasant woman. Not to be conspicuous, a day or so later, he did the same thing with me and gave me to a different family. I woke up And I look around, and I only knew a few words because I was 17 months old. I asked for my mother. And they go into a state of panic. Oh my God. What if the Gestapo come to their farm? What are they going to do? This child knows Yiddish. Everybody would be automatically killed, no question. But where to hide me? The farmhouse consisted of 2 rooms. So there were elderly parents, and there was Yannick. He was about 30 and the head of the family, and his son John. Yannick's wife had passed away, and he had wanted another child, and here I was ready-made. But what to do with me? Where to put me? What are they going to do? They're racking their brains. Now, Poland, the winters are very cold. So the farmhouse is built a little higher off the ground, and whatever vegetables they harvest, they put underneath the house. So when the ground freezes, it saves their vegetables, and they have food for the winter. So they decided the only place they could put me was to dig a grave, which they did. And they put something down, a cot and a mattress and blankets or whatever to keep me warm, because obviously it was freezing cold, and the ground and the dirt. And for the next 2 weeks, all I did was scream and cry and beg and cry and scream. And the reason we know how much time elapsed that I was there is because after 10 days, my uncle went and met with the Polish people that I was with, and the woman said, "We don't think we can keep her because she's absolutely hysterical." And my uncle said, "Where I'm going, I cannot take a child. Eventually, she'll stop crying." And eventually, I did stop crying. And I remember they brought me up, and I was filthy from the earth. And I remember being bathed and being put, new clothes on. And Yannick was there. And Yannick became my father. And I have to say, he was the most amazing parent. I was so fortunate to have him because he was loving, he was there, he carried me in his arms, and I, of course, bonded with him, and as far as I knew, he was my father. That was it. When Yannick felt it was safe, that nobody would report that he's harboring a Jewish child, he took me to church, and he had me baptized. And so my given name, my mother had given me, I'm named for my father's mother, was Bela. Then I was Bela Tzemach, and then I became Nina Matrolevich, and that's how we existed as a family in the farm. In 1945, my mother was liberated by the Russian army, but there was no place to take me to because they were all living in displaced persons camps and they had next to nothing. So I was better off staying with Yannick on the farm where I was safe. But every day my mother and my grandmother would come to see me, and I would say to Yannick, "Tatusha," that's father in Polish, "here come the 2 nice ladies to see me." And Yannick would say, "Oh, they are very nice ladies." But he was absolutely amazed that a Jew survived knowing what was happening in Poland. He didn't think anyone from my family would ever come to reclaim me. And he was devastated about that because he knew the time would come. So I remained with him, and now I'm close to 4. And my mother comes one day with my grandmother, with my aunt, and says to me, "Ninkale, do you want to go pick flowers?" And I say, "Yes, I'd love to pick flowers." And we go pick flowers, and I have a wonderful day. and now it's starting to get dark. And I say to them, I have to go home to my father. And they hear me, yes, yes, yes. They tell me, yes, yes. And I repeat, I have to go home to my father, but they're taking me away from my father in a different direction. And now I'm starting to get very upset because they're not listening to me. And now they take me to where they're staying. And my mother says, I'm your mother. It meant nothing to me. She was a stranger. And I start to panic now because they're taking me away from my father. So what I experienced initially when I was given away, I now experience the second time when my mother reclaimed me. Hysteria, unhappiness, every picture of me is with a scowl, crying, because I felt that I was with strangers. These were people that I didn't know who they were just because they had a title, mother, grandmother. It meant nothing to me. We stayed like that for about 8 months, and we had to, in order for us to come to the United States, we had to leave Poland and go to Germany. And we were transported there by U.S. Army trucks at night. That was the only way they were able to travel because they were still killing us. So at night, in pitch black, the U.S. Army trucks, I remember sitting on the U.S. Army truck, and they took us from Poland to Germany. But before we left, my mother allowed Janek to come and say goodbye to me. She hadn't allowed him to see me because she wanted me to distance myself from him emotionally. I didn't know that he was coming, and then I saw him. And it was like, oh my God, my father's here, he's going to take me back, everything will be good. And he just picked me up in his arms, and his tears were just pouring from his eyes, and I was holding on to him for dear life, begging, take me home, take me home. He couldn't say a word because he knew it wasn't going to happen. And then he asked my mother if she could please leave me with him till I'm 18, and then he'll send me to America to her. And my mother said, if I leave her with you till she's 18, she's your daughter, not mine. So he said to her, can you please never change her name? And my mother said, I will keep the name. Hence the name Nina, not my initial given name. So my father was one of 10 siblings. One brother survived. I met him 15 years ago for the first time in my life because his granddaughter on Facebook sent out a message. We're looking for Bela, born in Poland. And my youngest son happened to be, by coincidence, on Facebook, and he saw it, and he called me at work, and he was screaming, Mom, there's someone in Israel looking for you. I said, there's only one person in the world that would have that information. It has to be my father's only surviving brother. One of 10 survived. And my mother's family, they were 5, and only 2, the 2 that were in the Vilna ghetto, survived. Everybody else was murdered. I lost over 100 members of my family. And we left Poland, we went to Germany. We lived in Germany for 2 years. And then we came to the United States in 1949, a week before my 7th birthday. I could speak 3 languages fluently, no English. Polish and German were not popular languages in Brooklyn, New York. And we were processed through Ellis Island. And then my next life began with another name. So I can tell you I have had 4 last names. I have never been in the witness protection program. Thank you for inviting me, and having me come here to share my story. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
The music for Steven Spielberg's film, Schindler's List, was composed and conducted by John Williams. The original score features a famous violinist, Yitzhak Perlman. The movie tells the story of how businessman Oskar Schindler saved over 1,000 Jewish lives from the Nazis by employing them in his factories. It is a powerful reminder of the importance of individual actions in the face of evil. Please welcome Glastonbury High School violinists who will play this music for us tonight.
you so much.
Good evening. The Glastonbury Holocaust Remembrance Project includes an important student component. We have a scholarship contest that is open to all high school students who live in Glastonbury or attend the Glastonbury High School. The Education Subcommittee brainstormed 2 questions which we posed for students to consider. We asked, what action would you as an individual take to stop ridicule, stereotyping, indifference, bullying, violence, hatred, and/or discrimination of any kind? How would you inspire and involve your peers in your call to action? Students could respond by submitting an essay or any form of art, music, or technology. This year, all students submitted essays. All entries were judged by 5 individuals, and it is to them, our judges, that we extend a heartfelt thanks. Earlier this evening, we honored our award winners in a separate gathering, which was only open to the students and their invited guests. We did this because we wanted the focus to be on them. We wanted to honor the students who use their voices in the form of a pen to stand against hate. When there are so many demands on high school students' lives, it takes very special students to go beyond their schoolwork and to use their thoughts, their learning, and to create something that is very important. And we recognize that these young people who did this are very special. Tonight I have the honor to introduce 4 students who answered these 2 important questions about promoting human dignity and confronting hate. Collectively, their responses identified: stand up, speak up, do not be silent, do not be indifferent, choose to lead, refuse to be a bystander, commit yourself to be a voice. Pretty darn smart, I think these kids are. All 4 of our winners tonight received a certificate from the Glastonbury Holocaust Remembrance Project and a certificate from Senator Richard Blumenthal, whose schedule did not allow him to join us tonight. As I now introduce our scholarship winners, I ask them to please stand and remain standing until all winners are recognized. And I ask you, members of the audience, to please hold your applause until all students are recognized. Our first place winner, who entitled her essay, "Learning from the Cobblestones," is Miriam Bolnick. She received a scholarship check in the amount of $350. Thank you. Our second place winner is Lila Cohen, who entitled her essay "From Silence to Action." Lila received a scholarship check for $250. Our third place winner is Jessica Linkov, who entitled her essay "Stereotypes and Prejudices." Jessica received a scholarship check for $150. And our fourth place winner, who could not be here tonight, is Noah Cady, who entitled his essay, "I Stood Hesitantly." Please join me in celebrating these most special young people. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alexa Mason. I will be reading a poem called Terezin, written by Hanus Hagenberg, who was 15 years old when he died in the Birkenau gas chamber. That bit of filth and dirty walls and all around barbed wire, and 30,000 souls who sleep, who once will wake and once will see their own blood spilled. I was once a little child 3 years ago, that child who longed for other worlds. But now I am no more a child, for I have learned to hate. I am a grown-up person now. I have known fear. But anyway, I still believe I only sleep today, that I'll wake up a child again and start to laugh and play. I'll go back to childhood sweet like a briar rose, like a bell which wakes us from a dream, like a mother with an ailing child, loves him with aching woman's love. How tragic, then, is youth which lives with enemies, with gallows, ropes. How tragic, then, for children on your lap to say, this for the good, that for the bad. Somewhere, far out there, childhood sweetly sleeps. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Rachel Donnell, is a second-generation Holocaust descendant. Her mother and father, aunts and uncles were survivors of the Holocaust. Rachel believes that it is so important for people, and especially our youth, to learn about the Holocaust and all the relevant lessons it holds for our lives today. She continues to speak about all of this in many schools and communities across Connecticut. Please join me now in welcoming Rachel Donnell to our Glastonbury community.
Okay, now that I got that taken care of. Good evening. I appreciate this opportunity to share my parents' Holocaust experiences with you tonight. I want to thank the committee that worked so hard to plan and make this important remembrance come together for tonight. My mother and father suffered a lot during the Holocaust. Why? Why? Because they were Jewish. They were different. And because Hitler encouraged prejudice and stereotyping and hate. Both of my parents, fortunately, survived the Holocaust. My father was in hiding at Majdanek concentration camp. As I was growing up, I would often hear him screaming at night from a nightmare about the Holocaust. But it was too painful for him to talk about it with me. But my mom, she would talk to me about it, her experiences. We would sit at the kitchen table and she would tell me about her experiences during the Holocaust and about being in Auschwitz concentration camp. My mother's and father's parents did not survive. They were killed. Since I had no grandparents, I did not know what grandparents were until I went to school. Many of my parents' brothers and sisters were also murdered. In my mom's family, there were 5 children. Their ages 8 to 17. 4 sisters and a little brother, Moishi. My mother was 16 years old when the war started. Before she became a victim of the Holocaust, she had a happy family life in Poland. But in 1939, Poland was the first country the Nazis attacked. There was little communication or news available in those days. Obviously, no internet. There was no TV. There was only radio, which was controlled by the government. So one day, unexpectedly, there was a knock on the door. The Nazis came to my mother's door with guns and told her and her family to quickly leave their home and get on the wagon. They told the family, "You'll be back here after the war," which we know was not true. My mother and her family were taken to Krakow ghetto. They were surrounded by barbed wire, crowded into a small apartment with other people, and forbidden to leave the ghetto. They were given very little food, some smelly bowl of watery soup with maybe a piece of stale bread. There was lots of disease in the ghetto, but there was no doctors to go to. In the ghetto, many people died because there were such poor health conditions there. Imagine sharing an outdoor toilet with thousands of other people and having to wait in line for your turn. The toilet was a wooden board with a hole in it. My mother shared with me how the Nazi men would be there to watch her as she used the toilet. Hitler wanted the Jewish people to be embarrassed, to be feeling dehumanized. I've often been asked by others why my mother and her family didn't escape. Please remember, the Nazis had guns and dogs and would shoot you for running away. And where would they go? People were quick to report to the Nazis if they saw a Jew trying to run away. Other countries, even the United States, was not letting Jewish people into their country. After a few years in the ghetto, they were forced to march to Plaszow labor camp. The commander of Plaszow labor camp was Armin Gett, a monster. He would stand on the balcony of his home up on the hill with a rifle in hand, look down at the Jewish prisoners, and randomly shoot like it was a sport for fun. My mother told me that when she was there, a Nazi woman asked her to sew a dress and gave her material. But when the Nazi soldier saw the material, he accused my mother of stealing it. The Nazi woman stood by and said nothing as the Nazi soldier severely punished my mother. My mom had to kneel on small, sharp stones all day, 24 hours, with no food. As I was growing up, I often remember my mom saying how her knees hurt her. Sometimes she couldn't even go up the stairs to the bedroom, and we would bring the mattress down to the living room for her. After Plaszow labor camp, my mom, with her 3 sisters and mother, were forced onto a train intended for animals. 200 women were forced into each cattle car on the train, standing one against another, with no food, no water, no bathroom, only a little bit of air, and no way to sit and no way to lay down. They were stuck on that train, and not knowing where they were going or for how long they would be stuck in that train. After 2 days, they arrived in Auschwitz concentration camp. Many women had died in the cattle car due to no food, no water, and little air. When the cattle doors opened and the light streamed in, my mom saw many dead bodies on the ground around her. And then she was yelled at by a Nazi to quickly get out onto the platform. At Auschwitz, a number was burned into her arm. I remember her having a number right there. I remember sometimes when she went places, she would feel uncomfortable. People would stare at it. I remember sometimes she would put a Band-Aid over the number so people wouldn't stare. When that number was burned into her skin, she no longer had a name. Her identity was taken. Now she was just a number. What happened next was very humiliating to my mom. A young man shaved off all her hair everywhere. At night, they were taken to the barracks. My mother had to sleep on a board about the size of a double bed and with 12 other people. Whoa. This is a book that my Aunt Erna wrote. My mother's sister wrote this book about my mother and the three sisters during the Holocaust. And I'd like to read something from this book so you can hear the words of a survivor. The next morning, we were ordered to march toward the wires. My head up and my eyes opened. I knew now what awaited us. Crumbled between the wires was a human body. How tiny it seemed. A small bundle of clothes still holding onto the wire. It was the last remains of Ulich, the boy I spoke to yesterday. A young boy, an enemy of the German Reich. The Nazi yelled, "Look, look, look well, he wanted freedom. Anyone disregarding orders will meet the same destiny. Don't try to run away. Those wires are electric. Now get back to work." To survive, my mom had to work very hard. Even though she was weak, she was hungry, only getting one piece of bread and some watery soup for the whole day. She felt lucky if she even got a piece of a potato that was in that watery soup. My mother had to carry long, heavy telephone poles, and you know how wood can be really heavy. And she would only have one other woman to help her carry that long telephone pole. But she knew if she could not work, they would kill her. My mom told me something I will always remember. She said, "You find the strength when you need it." To me, that means finding the physical strength and also the emotional strength. At night, it was difficult to sleep with so much hunger. I would like to read something in my aunt's book again. Hunger pains kept us awake at night. Day by day, we were getting weaker. Something I had never experienced before was becoming clear to me now. How did people die of starvation? How did it feel, and how could one possibly live without food? Was it just a physical agony, or did the body and soul die together? I knew now that it was something nobody could understand without experiencing it fully to comprehend the anguish one is subjected to. The death which comes by starvation is a prolonged death of unutterable torment. Yes, starvation is another cruel way of dying. The body dies inch by inch, day by day, yet one lives. How did we live through this death? Was it because we were young, or was it because we were determined to survive? Was it simply a miracle? To the four of us, it was all these things and even more. It was a feeling of togetherness, of belonging, and of the great love we had for each other, and an even greater love of life. Those were the words of my Aunt Erna. I felt it was a miracle that the four sisters survived Auschwitz. They had to be so careful not to let the Nazis know that they were sisters, because Hitler would not want families to be together, because then they'd have the support, and that was not in Hitler's plan. In 1945, the Germans knew they were losing the war. They wanted to remove any evidence that the American soldiers would have to see when they got there. They wanted to watch the rest of the Jews die on a forced march, a death march, through Poland's cold winter snow and in the woods. And Poland was very cold. Temperatures there could get even as cold as minus 30 degrees. My mom and her three sisters had to march for miles and miles, days and days, without warm clothes and no boots. They knew if they were unable to walk, they would be killed. My mom and her sisters were getting very weak after so many days and afraid they would not be able to walk the next day. So that night, when they were put into a barn, my mom's sister saw a hole in the floor under the boards. Since they were all so skinny like skeletons, they decided they would crawl into that hole on their stomach, one on top of the other. And you can imagine how difficult it must have been for them all night. Luckily, in the morning, the Nazis did not find them. When the war ended, where were they to go? No parents, no home. Imagine 6 years, no home, no food, no parents, no freedom, only fear. 6 million Jewish people were killed during the Holocaust. These were families, including women and children. Their only crime was being born Jewish. They were not an army. I asked myself, how could civilized, educated fathers and sons become Nazis and murderers? But this is what happened. Before World War II, the Germans were regular family-oriented people, but Hitler knew that the national pride of the German people was strongly hurt when they lost World War I, and the poor economy was also affecting the German people. The Jews were convenient scapegoats, easy to blame, though they were not responsible. Hitler was a strong force. He used propaganda and lies about the Jewish people, and by saying his lies often enough, truth, to many it became truth, and they would become Nazis and be willing to kill, not looking at Jews as people anymore. The Nazis stopped thinking for themselves. They were following others. Hitler used fear and promises to promote prejudice and encouraged hatred to those who were different and stereotyping of people so they no longer were seen as individuals, but as an unwanted group of people. I'd like to ask you a question. Do you think Hitler's war machine against families, women, children, did it start with words or did it start with violence? So please, if you think it started with violence, please raise your hand. If you think it started with words, please raise your hand. Yep, that's exactly what it was. That illustrates the power of words, something that I know someone else mentioned tonight. Bullies used words. Hitler used words. He used words continuously, words of hatred. The Holocaust did not start at the gas chambers. It started in the minds of the people listening to Hitler's propaganda. His propaganda was against the Jewish people, and it was hate speech. As a parent, I taught my 3 kids, there's one, that hate was not a word to use when you're talking about another person. It was just too strong a word. I would tell them, you don't like somebody, you can say you don't like them. You can say you feel differently about something than they do, that's fine. But the word hate about a person, my children didn't do that. They learned from me. As an aside, I will tell you, the reason I mention that is because my daughter told me to mention that. I think it's really important to understand the dangers of hatred, of stereotyping and prejudice. The dangers of stereotyping, putting the blame on others, scapegoating, the danger of blindly following others, and not thinking for oneself. Think of the masses in Germany. They followed Hitler without thinking for themselves. Think of all the people and the countries that stood by and did nothing. People chose not to see and not to do anything. The atrocity of the Holocaust didn't just happen, it was allowed to happen. We all make choices every day. Each of you make choices. We choose how we treat each other. Do we see people for who they are as individuals or as a stereotype based on what they look like, where they come from, perhaps their religion or their culture? It comes down to what kind of person do we want to be? What kind of family, community, country do we want to be? The Nazis chose hate. They chose to kill. I believe it is important that these horrible things never are allowed to happen again. Never happen again to the Jewish people or to any people. It's important to me that the Holocaust should never be forgotten. In memory of those who were murdered during the Holocaust, I'd like to say, never again. Thank you.
Friends, we are grateful to have had this time together in this sacred place. I'm Kate Vanderzee Glidden, and I'm the senior pastor here at First Church, and it is our distinct honor that we have been able to celebrate this with all of you. A celebration, a remembrance, an honoring, amazing words, inspiring words. So we are glad that we have been together. I offer my thanks to the committee. If they're not standing already, I ask that the committee members stand, for they are the ones that work all year long to make this happen. And as we know, with any community, church or synagogue or otherwise, it takes a team. And this was your team who made this event happen again this year, and we are grateful. We invite you, after the service or this time together ends, to join us, go through this door into Schultz Hall for a time of fellowship and refreshments. On the back of your program, you will see a QR code and a survey. The committee would like you to fill that out because they'd like feedback. It's always good to hear what you all are thinking and feeling. So we know the power of light and love. We know that in our individual communities and in our wider community. We are going to end this time together with music and with light. So as we say here at First Church, we're going to do a little safety lesson first. Hopefully you all received candles. I ask you to be mindful of the people around you. And when the ushers come, they will light the candle of the person on the aisle, and you will pass the light like this The person with the unlit candle will tip it towards the person with the lit candle. I know it sounds simple. We want to stay safe.
Have another lesson.
And we're having another lesson now. Ushers, will you come on down? Friends, we will go out into the darkness of the night. We will go out with a light, the light of justice, the light of peace, the light of love. May we always remember that one candle can make all the difference, but many candles can change the world. So friends, let us bring the light, let us bring the love, let us bring the hope and the peace.
This is the sound of
Thank you all for joining us this evening. Please join us in Schultz Hall for refreshments. And I want to thank my committee for all their hard work. And I want to thank the church again and our beautiful accompaniment of musicians and our committee member Beth Flynn for being coerced to be our vocalist. So thank you so much, and hope to see you all again next year. Okay, the candles can be placed in the red buckets on your way out. Thank you again.